Previously on this very channel, we discussed some discoveries that prove various parts of the Bible to be true. Like we mentioned in that first video, the Bible's a really big book and it's got a lot of stuff going on in it. As such, there are far too many discoveries that historians and archaeologists have made to fit in a single video. Therefore, part 2. According to the Bible, Jesus spent years living in Capernaum with the Apostle Peter and his family. There was a small fishing village on the Sea of Galilee, but the town would eventually become abandoned. By only the 3rd century, a contemporary report referred to the town as despicable, stating that the only inhabitants were 7 houses full of impoverished fishermen. The city would be rebuilt, but again fall to disrepair and was abandoned. When a scholar visited the remains of Capernaum in 1838, he discovered the entire place as being desolate and mournful. That's hardly the sort of description that would encourage much tourism. However, this has since become a popular site thanks to what was found beneath the ruins of a 5th century Byzantine Matrium church. Buried beneath the foundation for the church was a simple 1st century home. The house was completely typical of any 1st century Roman house at the time, although it was slightly bigger. Though this originally would have functioned as a home, the archaeological evidence shows that the house transformed in nature. The main room was plastered over from floor to ceiling, something that was extremely rare for the day. Pots and bowls for cooking had been replaced with large storage jars and oil lamps. It was clear that the site was no longer being used as a home, but rather as a communal meeting place. Afterwards, the house was renovated again and turned into an early church, and the walls were littered with graffiti carved into the walls in Greek, Syriac, and Hebrew. The carvings read things like, "Christ have mercy," and "Lord Jesus Christ, help thy servant." Early reports claimed that St. Peter's name was mentioned in some of the graffiti as well, though there is some debate over that. In the 5th century, the new church was built on top of this location. The new church was an octagonal Matrium church. Matrium churches came in different shapes, but octagonal churches were normally reserved for important locations. In this case, that important site could be the home of St. Peter. Now, obviously, all of this is circumstantial, but it's a reasonably strong case. Though Capernaum was an important town for trading and commerce, a more natural choice for setting up an early church for Christian worship would have either been Nazareth or Jerusalem. This building, being in Capernaum, lends a lot of credence to the biblical claim that Jesus lived with Peter's family and set up his ministry at Capernaum after leaving Nazareth. While this is not the only church that was built on top of a residence that has been used for worship, the octagonal shape indicates it was likely more important than most. Since the renovations to change the house into a communal place of worship began in the 1st century, even if the house they found did not belong to Peter, it is still evidence that supports Jesus' ministry having begun in Capernaum. Earthquakes were a common occurrence in the ancient Middle East, and that hasn't really changed. Moderate to large earthquakes were so common, in fact, that they were rarely seen as worth keeping a historical record of. One of the few exceptions was the earthquake that shook the place during the 52-year reign of Uzziah, king of Judah, during the 8th century BC. This earthquake is mostly cited as appearing in the book of Amos, the earliest written prophetic book of the Bible, though it appears in others such as Zechariah, Ezekiel, and the 2nd book of Chronicles. According to the story, Uzziah was a powerful and successful ruler, but this led him to becoming prideful and eventually his downfall. It is said that he went to Solomon's temple to burn incense, which was seen as an attempt to usurp the authority of the priests. Immediately, an earthquake hit that tore apart the temple. Uzziah was struck with leprosy, and he was chased out of the temple by the priests before he even had the chance to make the offering of incense. We don't know whether or not King Uzziah actually had leprosy, but if so, the disease probably didn't manifest in such a dramatic fashion. If this is an accurate timeline for precisely when the earthquake struck, well, we'll leave that up to you. Given that the book of Amos is supposed to be a book of prophecies, but is believed to have been written at least 10 years after this took place, we certainly aren't going to rule out that artistic licenses were taken. But regardless of what King Uzziah was doing at the time, we do know that this earthquake really happens. We've actually known for a while that an earthquake took place, but it wasn't until 2021 that we discovered the earthquake also hit Jerusalem, the capital of Judah and the home of Solomon's temple. Until this recent discovery, it couldn't be stated for certain whether Jerusalem was also affected by the quake or if the writers had simply changed the location of the tremors for dramatic effect. Ruins were found near the base of Temple Mount, which is believed to have been where Solomon's temple was located. This was a rare discovery, as 200 years after the earthquake, earthquake, Jerusalem was seized by the Babylonians, who did a whole lot of razing of buildings. However, the ruins that were found had no sign of fire, and they were dated to 760 BC, give or take 25 years. This puts them firmly within the reign of King Uzziah, and at a time when there's no record of other invading forces that could provide an alternative explanation for the damage. The damage to the newly discovered ruins is consistent with damage that would be done by a large-scale earthquake. Researchers state that the earthquake would have been at least a 7.8 in magnitude, but likely closer to an 8.2. This lines up with the other evidence of the earthquake that was found in different locations throughout Israel and Jordan. Though we will never be able to say for certain what Uzziah was doing when the earthquake struck, we can say for sure that he would definitely have felt it. That proof of crucifixion as a means of execution is even needed may sound strange. The practice is well documented, and it is known that tens of thousands of people were crucified by the Roman Empire. But despite how common a method of execution it was, there was never any archaeological proof that it happened. No crosses were ever found, nor any skeletons that showed signs of having been crucified. The plethora of primary source documents made it clear that the practice surely must have happened, but physical evidence simply didn't exist. In 1968, that finally changed. The Six-Day War of June 1967 saw Israel take control of the Old City and East Jerusalem. Following the war, they immediately began a number of construction projects that resulted in the frequent discovery of ancient artifacts and other archaeological discoveries. Among those was a 2,000-year-old burial chamber. The wall to the burial chamber was accidentally broken through, and so the Israeli Department of Antiquities and Museums was called in to investigate the tombs. Inside, they found a typical ancient Jewish tomb. The structure contained two main chambers with 12 small sections carved into the wall as the places of burial. 9 of these sections contained individual skeletons, but 3 of them contained ossuaries. An ossuary is basically just a box to toss bones into. This was also common for the time. Bodies would be interred for about a year or so until all of the fleshy bits decomposed, and then the bones would be collected and placed into the ossuary so that the burial plot could be reused, with multiple ossuaries easily fitting in the space of a single burial plot. This had a religious significance, but it was also a practical matter for conserving space. One of the ossuaries found had an inscription on it that read, "Yahohanan, son of something." The initial reading was interpreted as son of Haggakol, but that is not a name scholars had ever seen before. This led some to reinterpret the letters as reading son of Hezkel, while others came to the conclusion that the words mean son of the crucified one. This has led to some amount of confusion, as there were 2 sets of bones in that particular box. One was a man in his mid-20s, the other was a child of only 3 or 4. Other than the name Haggakol never appearing anywhere before, none of this was particularly noteworthy. A man and his child died within a short span of time, and their bones were interred in an ossuary together. It's sad, but normally this would not have been a major archaeological discovery. However, punctured through the man's heel bone was a large metal nail. Not only was this the first ever archaeological evidence that crucifixions really did take place, but it was evidence that the Romans would in fact nail people to the cross on occasion. Unlike the account of Jesus, Yohanan's feet were not both nailed to the cross with a single nail. Instead, each of his heels was nailed separately to the side of the cross. However, his hands showed no evidence of having been nailed and thus were likely tied, as is believed to have been common practice. Pottery and other evidence found within the tomb put the date of the bodies to be approximately 37 BC. In December of 2021, another heel bone with a crucifixion nail through it was found in the United Kingdom. This time, the body was estimated to be from the 3rd century, which shows that the practice of crucifixion remained common throughout the ancient Roman Empire. In both of these cases, the use of nails is extremely significant, as it is widely believed that the victims were normally only tied to the cross, though many historians believe that nails may have been more common than people generally believe. We mentioned earlier that Jerusalem had been seized by the Babylonians, and this event is in fact depicted in the Bible in the Book of Kings. It is also described on the Babylonian Chronicles, a series of clay tablets written in cuneiform that detail the important historical events of Babylonian history. Normally, battles are described differently by the winners and losers, though the losers don't often get the chance to tell their side of the story. In this case, however, both the Bible and the Babylonian Chronicles tell the exact same story despite being on opposite sides of the war. In both texts, we see King Nebuchadnezzar travel to Egypt and defeat Pharaoh Necho in 605 BC. Then, in 598 BC, he took control of Jerusalem, removing King Joachim from the throne and replacing him with his uncle Mattaniah, who Nebuchadnezzar renamed as Zedekiah. Nebuchadnezzar then plundered a bunch of treasure, including a ton of gold that had been kept in Solomon's temple, and headed back home. We covered a lot of topics from the Book of Kings the last time we discussed this topic on the channel, so it's no surprise that we find more evidence of the Book of Kings' historical accuracy today. This instance is noteworthy not only because of the outside confirmation of the event, but because both sides of the battle describe it identically. The only difference in the two accounts is the explanation for why this all took place. In the Bible, it says that it happened as punishment for Israel's sins, whereas the Babylonian Chronicles say that it happened just because Nebuchadnezzar felt like it, and, well, who the hell was going to stand in the way of Babylon's greatest king? If you had to pick any book of the Bible to guess that archaeologists had proven accurate, the book of Genesis would probably be near the bottom of that list. No, scientists have not discovered the Garden of Eden or the skeletal remains of Adam and Eve, but they did discover the existence of an entire kingdom that many secular historians didn't actually believe existed. The Edomites were descendants of the Esau, who founded the Kingdom of Edom in the book of Genesis. Esau was the grandson of Abraham and the 10 times great-grandson of Noah. The name Edom means red and comes from Esau's red hair. We can't comment on that lineage or on who founded Edom with any certainty, but thanks to new research from 2019, we can say that not only did Edom exist, but that they were far more advanced than we would have expected. Now, they're not advanced in a lost city of Atlantis sort of way, but it was still pretty impressive for the era. Edom was in the desert, where the land was far too dry for farming, so they had to rely on trade. They may not have had an abundance of grain or textiles, but they did have copper. Massive amounts of copper. They mined this using standardized methods that were extraordinarily advanced and efficient for the time, allowing them to mine large amounts of the metal with ease. The Tinmah mine complex in southern Israel was already known to exist, but the Edomites were thought to be a fantasy, with mining operations not taking place until the 9th or 10th century BC, following Egyptian influence. While excavating piles of spent slag, the waste product of copper smelting, pieces of leftover charcoal that were used to heat the smelters were found. By using radiocarbon dating on the charcoal, they were able to not only find the exact age of the mine, but also track the progression of the smelting process and its efficiency. What they discovered is that the mines had been active since the 13th century BC. Not only was this 300 years earlier than historians believed anyone lived there, but it matched the biblical timeline for the founding of the Kingdom of Edom. Though the Edomites make appearances throughout several books of the Bible, that archaeological proof of something that first appeared in the book of Genesis can be found is pretty astonishing.